enumeration of board member attendance and voting. Do you have that, or is it going around?
I have one. If people want it to go around, we can, or
Oh,
want to do roll call.
I'll just do a roll call, but I need a sheet, so I can make sure I don't have to drag it there. Okay. Yes. Okay. So I'll start with Mount Desert. Gail Marshall. Teresa King. Are you voting?
Yeah.
Okay. Brian Hinkle.
Here, voting.
Jamie Whitehead.
Here, not voting.
Kathy Omke.
Here in the building.
Okay, Bar Harbor. Dwayne Bolt. Robin Sue Tapley.
Here voting.
Marie Yarborough.
Voting.
Lily Simmons. Patrick Skate.
Here.
John Bench.
Here,
Susan Allen.
Here voting.
John Eisenhower.
Here, not voting.
Bo Lysy.
Here, not voting.
Jim Sawyer.
Here, voting.
Okay, I'm here and I'm voting. Jessica Bass. Terry Hayes is not here and not voting. Roger St. Amand.
Here, voting.
Eliza Bishop.
Here voting.
Okay, Jennifer Vanilla. I think she said she was sick today. She wasn't in here. Gary Burr.
Here, voting.
Tom Reed.
Here, not voting.
Darcy Throckmorton.
Here voting.
Aaron Brown.
Here, voting.
And I heard there's no one from the outer islands. Is that right? Okay, we're just gonna be joining us today. Okay. So the vouchers have gone around. Hopefully you checked your, I mean, I haven't seen one in a couple of days, but you know, check for your vouchers and sign them. Is there any public comment?
Yep.
Okay, right away.
You know what the microphone's for there?
Yes, yes, it is.
I move it?
Sure.
We don't have to screech, huh? Hey, everybody. My name is Mac McElwain. A lot of you know this by now. I'm from Southwest Harbor. And for those of you who don't know me, I've been coming to school board meetings asking the school board to not require my child to get vaccinated in order to graduate high school. She's going to be graduating early, and it seems like she's not going to have to get vaccinated in order to do so. And for that, I thank you all very much for at least waiting. I don't know how much my public comments have influenced your decision, whether or not I've made a difference there. I've still been made to feel very welcome at all these meetings as I get up here and have shaky legs and I'm all nervous and saying things I know a lot of you probably don't agree with at the very least. So thanks for making me feel welcome. I don't know that I'm going to keep coming to these meetings. It's quite a commitment, as you all know. But I would like to offer a little bit of constructive criticism after going to so many meetings for the last 3, 4, 5 months. The first is something I noticed. I think Todd Graham, who used to be the chair of the Northeast Harbor School Board, has a second public comment section at the end of each school board meeting, which is great and allows people of the public to get up and speak about the content of the meeting they just attended and to address things that came up in the meeting instead of waiting a whole month. And then it's kind of, what's the point? You know, it's not as effective to comment on something that happened a month ago as it is something that happened 5 minutes ago. I think that'd be a great idea to do at all the meetings, which I know increases the length of the meetings. And the meetings are kind of long already. And I know you guys, I think a lot of you probably work more hours than I do. And I'm struggling to make it to these meetings. And all I have to do is speak for 3 minutes and choose which rant to go off of. You guys got a job to do here, which leads me to my next idea. So just consider this. I don't know what's the right answer because I'm not a school board member. I don't know what it's like. But I've noticed in a lot of the meetings, half of the school board is sitting with their backs 5 feet away from an open window, the fans blowing. And halfway through the meeting, people are shivering and getting up and moving and freezing cold and trying to hurry through stuff that can be pretty important. It may not be the best setting for a job that's as important as being a school board member, which I had no idea the responsibility. I had no idea there were teachers unions and people trying to work on policies and issues for a year at a time. Stuff that you guys got to do on your own time at home. I had no idea how much work you guys had to do. So my idea here is to have these meetings outside around a fire, a big one, or a bunch of smaller ones. If you're going to be freezing anyways, and the point of the masks and the open windows is to reduce the spread of COVID, go outdoors. Just an idea. And an even more extreme idea is I realize that we've all got jobs, and some of us have 2 or 3, and some of us work 70 hours a week. And to squeeze in a school board meeting between leaving work and going home to cook dinner or picking your kids up, you're dedicating a tight window of time because you can make it work. I don't know what it's like trying to come up with a schedule that works for 30 people. Imagine it's pretty difficult. But it seems like the job as a school board member is such a huge responsibility that maybe it should be given more time. And I'm saying this with complete deference and reverence to what you've done and continue to do, and complete ignorance to how much time you already spent. But if you could afford to take a day or 2 off of work per month and have one of these school board meetings, or all of them, at noontime, under the sun, around a fire, outdoors, dedicate a whole day to it, so you're not rushing, you're not leaving work early, with work on your mind. You're not rushing to get to the meeting, you're not rushing to get home from the meeting, because you're tired and frozen. But if you could actually wake up, sleep in even, go for a walk, have a nice breakfast, get your thoughts together, come to the meeting, stand around a fire, have a meeting, hot dogs, beer, ice fishing, do it on a pond. I mean, you can have some fun with this, and it's not fun yet. I've had a couple fun meetings, but these are just some ideas, and I don't expect you to jump on it and say, look, let's hold everything and switch our schedule around that somehow worked out for us, but something to think about in the future. And like I said, I had no idea what I was getting into coming to these meetings, and I was pretty nervous. I still am nervous sometimes getting up and speaking. And I really appreciate you guys making me feel welcome and listening, because I feel like I'm being listened to, and I really appreciate that, and I appreciate the work you do. So thank you.
Is there any more public comments? I see someone's hand up in the back.
Hi, everyone. I'm Katrina Spruce. I have 2 kids in elementary school. I'm here to support the increase for teachers' raises. I have 3 reasons. The first is teaching doesn't seem like an entry-level job, so I don't think it should. Sorry. The 3 reasons I think teachers should get raises are: teaching isn't an entry-level job, so it shouldn't be paid as an entry-level position. Second, we should consider that teachers should get retirement benefits good enough that they can afford to retire and make room for new teachers. And third is, when I look at the budget, it looks like a lot gets soaked up in administrative fees. Maybe we can reallocate those to the teachers who are doing the work on the ground. Thank you.
What's your count? Go ahead.
Dear members of the AOS 91 School Board, my name is Abby Tadna, and I come before you tonight because I'm concerned about the future of our schools. One of the reasons my husband and I chose to move to MVI and raise our family here was the quality of the schools. And I think we all have reason to worry that this could be in jeopardy. I've been trying to gather as much information as I can, and I firmly believe that our teachers are severely underpaid, given the cost of living in our district and the high performance of our schools. This did not used to be the case. Schools in our district used to have competitive wages, and job postings would draw a large number of qualified candidates whereas now each open position draws only a handful of applicants, and the qualifications of these are lower than in the past. In the 3.5 years I've had children in the school district, I've already seen some fantastic teachers leave, and I've heard that morale is very poor. As a community, it's shameful that we're not paying our teachers a competitive wage, especially when they're working harder than ever during the pandemic, not to mention the increased personal risk of contracting COVID-19 due to their working conditions. Based on the data I've seen, the package that the teachers are asking for is thoroughly reasonable and would cost the overwhelming majority of taxpayers less than $100 per year. I have yet to speak to anyone who has not agreed that this is a no-brainer. To my mind, even if a taxpayer's main concern is the value of their home, they should still be more than willing to pay such a small amount to help ensure the quality of our schools, as a drop in performance would likely lead to a drop in home value as the area becomes less attractive to families of school-aged children. In sum, as a Bar Harbor resident and taxpayer, I'd be happy to pay a few extra dollars a month to help ensure that our schools can recruit and retain high-quality educators. Thank you for your time and attention.
Is there any more public comment? There is, I see a hand.
I was just wondering, is public comment, the ones that were sent online, are they gonna be shared tonight?
So the way that that works typically is that they're linked in the agenda that the board members get, like in a Google Doc, so we all read them. I mean, I know I've read them, and I believe everyone else has read them. So we don't typically read them all out loud, but they are linked to the agenda for everyone to read. And yeah, is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I just don't, does the general public here have access to those public comments?
Yes, they're on the website, right? I think, Selena, is that how a person accesses them? It's just by looking.
They're in the agenda link.
They're
under
right. So
public
any
comment.
person who has the agenda link can click on the agenda and, which is a public document. I presumably, you all have that agenda. Does that answer it? Okay, I see a hand.
I'm sorry, I missed the name of the gentleman that was speaking a couple people ago, but I really love the idea of having public comment at the end of the meeting as well. Is that something that you guys are open to?
We don't respond during public comment, but I will take that under, we can take it under advisement and discuss it.
Yeah, and I have one more question. I'm wondering about the hiring. I'm assuming I can be talking about anything at this point. I'm sorry I missed the very beginning, but I'm just wondering where the hiring process for the interim superintendent, where that stands right now, what the process is for that, as well as for the superintendent. I'm just wondering if we can get more information to teachers and community members about both of those things.
Yes, we can do that.
I know you can't answer, but I think that's really important. The interim as well as the new superintendent.
Okay, yes. Yes.
I missed the beginning as well, but I just wanted to echo what I heard the other people say, that I have a daughter here in the district, and the #1 reason that we decided to frankly spend extra and move on to the island was because of the quality of the schools, and I don't want to see that decrease. It's a major portion, I feel, of home values in the region, and I'd be happy to spend a little bit extra on my property taxes to support our teachers, make sure that they have a fair wage. That's all.
Any more public comment? Okay, thank you all for coming, being here this evening, this rainy evening. So our next item is approval of minutes. I would take a motion as a slate to approve the minutes of the 8th November 2021 and 16 November 2021 special meeting. Who was the second? Susan. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor? Just hold your hand up a minute to give Selena a chance to get everyone. Okay, thank you. That brings us to reports and updates, starting with the superintendent report.
Thank you, Jessica. Good evening. Our enrollments right now are at 1,398 students. Point out that prior to COVID, beginning of COVID, we had an enrollment of over 1,500. So we're down over 150 students right now. I know people are looking for updated COVID information. And put an email out today to the nurses and the principals because there's a lot going on with contact tracing and supporting our students and staff. But I know people would like to have updated information regarding how many staff are or are not vaccinated in terms of percentages, folks that are involved or enrolled in pool testing, which is voluntary, students enrollment in that. And additionally, we have vaccination clinics that are ongoing in concert with MBI Hospital, so we'll be able to update on that information. So I hope after this Friday to be able to release that information early next week, after that's provided from the nurses and the principals. I'd like to give a shout out to the hospital for their work in helping us with vaccination clinics at our school-based clinics. And again, a reminder that is voluntary for parents. No student will be vaccinated without parent or guardian permission. Which leads me to my next point, and folks want to know, what are the schools doing or not doing from day one since the inception of COVID. We followed the CDC and MBOE guidelines. So I really don't have a whole lot of information to share about what to do or not do, but I'd reiterate this: with the holiday season upon us, clearly what the experts are telling us are, if you're eligible to receive a vaccination, get a vaccination. If you're eligible to receive a booster, get a booster. When you're out in public, mask up, physically distance. And the most important thing, if you don't feel well, stay home. It's really that simple, folks. Our schools have been doing a great job. Our kids have been doing a great job. Our nurses, our staff, our teachers, our administrators, folks are tired, but they're unrelenting in their support to keep schools open for teaching and learning. So I hope folks will continue to do the right thing. Also mindful of school safety. There are situations that are unfolding in schools all across our nation every day. And I want folks to know that we never take school safety outside of health and wellness lightly. All of our schools have emergency procedures and plans, but it's not enough just to say we have a plan. It's important that our students and our staff practice those procedures to include lockdowns, closures in place, and that we provide support services when we know folks are troubled or have needs. And I'm really proud of the fact that our administrators, our counselors, and our staff do that. But that's ever mindful in what we do. And folks are the eyes and the ears of our schools. And so we tell folks all the time, including our students, if you see something that doesn't look right, please say something. Storms and contingency days are upon us. And it's likely that we'll start to see some cancellations. We still are doing snow days or cancellations. And so if you have not updated your school messenger account, please do so, because that's how we transmit the information and people will get that in the quickest manner, but it's also available to television and media. FY23 budget process is underway. Nancy, outside of any of the audits that we're undergoing right now to reconcile our funds, have 11 budgets to organize and pass. So we're in the thick of that, and boards will be receiving that information when the audits are complete. And we are actively underway with our budget process, as you all know. And finally, with the holiday season, I just want to wish best wishes to everybody and their families for a safe and happy holiday season. Thank you.
Any questions?
Oh, thank you.
So I think that brings us to Directors of Teaching and Learning, Julie and Rhonda. I feel like I should get this.
You can grab the mic.
Is it better to be, can you hear better from behind the mic? Okay, I'm just gonna bring this over here. Here we go. Good evening. Tonight, Rhonda and I just wanted to do a check-in with the school board to let them know how we are doing in terms of our NWA data. So last June, Julie Meltzer did a very comprehensive presentation, and she rested assured all of us that our students were in fact performing well. Tonight, Rhonda and I have a very similar story to tell, which is a testament to the skill and hard work of our teachers. First of all, I should tell you a little bit about the NWA. We've got some new board members. And this is something I know that we've been using in the district since I've been here, and this is my 9th year in the district, so I'm not sure how much history we have beyond that. But I do know that there's always been some question about whether or not we use the NWA, because at the time we were also doing the MEA, which was another testing measure that the state put forward, and it sometimes maybe felt like too much testing, right? We don't want to test our kids to death. And the reasons why we gave back then for using the NWA really are, in many respects, the same reasons why we give now. We're happy that currently, at least, the state has adopted the NWEA as its official measure for the same reasons we always professed it was a good idea to do it in the first place. So hopefully it'll stay, but it's precarious when you're dealing with state testing, and that may change in the future. I think it's fair to say we should just be fair warned, anything could change. First of all, it is nationally normed, and that's helpful for us when we talk about our students. We're always kind of interested on how they compare nationally, but all the tests do that, so that's not particularly special. But what makes this a little special is it focuses on growth, and it really gives us actionable data. Prior testing measures often kind of kept their cards close in terms of, okay, your student scored X, Y, and Z. This is where they compare nationally. But we're really not sure how you're going to operationalize and actually respond to that data. We kind of keep that at a national or state level. The NWA gives you, really lets you look under the hood and says, here's a breakdown of the skills and content that this kid needs practice on. This kid needs challenge. It's actually gotten better over the years in terms of allowing teachers to use it to be actionable. So in this respect, we find it very useful. It's also a computer adaptive test, and adaptive tests usually reduce testing time by 50% generally. So it is a more efficient way to test our kids. It also gives us an opportunity to communicate with parents with reports. Those aren't always as informative as the teacher reports, but again, it's just another measure to strengthen communication. It gives students an opportunity to set goals in relationship to math and reading. And a lot of our new applications that we're using today actually ask you to import student NWA scores so that they can tailor-make practice for your students. So there's a lot of benefits to using the NWA. This year we have language usage, which is new, and it's just a way we can measure components of writing. So it's reading, math, and language usage is what we're measuring. This year we are doing fall and spring grades 3 through 11. At the high school in past years, we never used the NWA for grades 10 and 11. We actually switched our fall measures for PSATs because we were gearing people up for the state measure in the spring of their junior year. with the SAT. So the last time kids would test using the NWA was 9th grade, but we just changed that so that we can be in alignment for the state assessment now for juniors, which is in fact the NWA. And a focus is growth. So that's why we're doing fall to spring to see if students are growing. We do a mid-year check for most students who are under the 50th, for all students under the 50th percentile. You might find that your student who may not be under the 50th percentile might do also a winter assessment. That's usually because a teacher finds it convenient or useful to test the whole class at once. And so that often happens. And we use it for a lot of different reasons. I mentioned responsive instruction. We use it to identify students in gifted and talented, as well as for intervention processes. I know I used it a lot when we evaluated programming. If we're going to do double time math, for instance, let's take a look at student scores who are in that versus a semester long experience and see who's performing well and what kind of cut scores sort of predict success in the next course. That being said, I know parents are often worried about just a test in terms of course placement. It's never that, it's that with teacher recommendation and discussion. It's just another data point for us to evaluate our programming and just to be more thoughtful about our decision making. And we've gotten very good at it. So when I talk about use of protocols and our valid scores, I think when we first implemented, we might have been a little messy with our implementation. Maybe our scores weren't necessarily as valid, but we're pretty autopilot. We're getting to a place of autopilot. Teachers are learning how to do this, how to carry it out in terms of, you know, the actual facilitation of the testing, and students are pretty familiar with it. So it's just, we're trusting our data. Before we share our data, I think it's important we just know the backdrop of COVID nationally. So this is national trends that the MWA has identified. And that generally speaking, kids have continued to show growth, but not as much growth pre-pandemic times. And then math being the one that's hit the hardest. And that's stuff you'll see in our data in comparison to the reading as well. And then lower grades, 3 through 5 getting hit the hardest, which makes a lot of sense when we have experienced COVID. Hybrid or online learning wasn't as easily accessible to the lower grades as it was to middle and high school. And then finally, our historically marginalized and economically disadvantaged students have been outperformed by their advantaged students. And we don't have that hard data yet. The state will produce that, but anecdotally, we can identify similar trends in our district. Okay. I get to present the grades 5 and 6 NWA data. This is fall data from the last 3 years. So when the 5th graders were in 3rd grade, 4th grade, and then this fall. The green bars are how these students perform on the NWA. This slide is for math. The black line is the national norm or the national mean. So you can see, sorry, I want to turn around and look at it. But that's why in the note card. And the first 5th graders were going from 3rd to 4th grade. Their growth was about 6 points. The expected growth for 4th grade from 3rd grade to 4th grade is 11 points. And the national average is 9. And then from 4th to 5th, our students grew about 12 points. The expected is 10, and the national average is 9.6. So our students this cohort of students going from 4th to 5th grade actually grew more than the national average and what was expected of them. The same group for reading, going from 3rd to 4th grade, they grew 10.8 points. The expected growth was 10, and the national average was 8.4. Going from 4th to 5th, they scored 7.2 points higher. The expected growth was 8, and the
national average was 7.8. So they grew quite a lot, exceeded growth expectations going from 3rd to 4th grade. They were just a little bit below going from 4th to 5th. This is data for the current 6th graders, so 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, going from, and this is math, going from 4th to 5th, 6.7 point increase. The expected is 10, and the national average is 7. Going from 5th to 6th grade, increased 7 points. The expected growth was 5.5, and the national average was 5.6. For reading, going from 4th to 5th, they gained 7.8 points, so the expected was 8, and the national average was 6.3. 5th, 6th grade, they grew 5.8 points. The expected was 5.5, and the national average was 5.7. So currently, our 5th and 6th graders are following those national trends of that first year, kind of leveling off a little bit, and then coming back last year in that second year, and meeting expected growth and exceeding the national average.
Okay. Now, I should note that we don't like to compare 5th grade over 5th grade over 5th grade because it's a different makeup of students. So it's more important to us to notice, the growth in our classes. So each class looks a little bit different. So this is our current 7th graders. So what we're looking for in math between 5th and 6th grade is a 5.5 jump. And between 6th and 7th grade is another 5.5 jump. And you can see we've made quite a larger jump between the 2020 to the 2021, which is consistent across math in the district. And then reading, we're looking for 5.5 between 5th and 6th grade, and then a 4-point jump between 6th and 7th grade. So this is current 8th graders, right? Yeah. Make sure my data. So we're looking for 5.5 points between 6th and 7th grade, and 5 points between 7th and 8th. As they get older, the jumps get a little more narrow. This is a strong group. And then in reading between 6th and 7th, we're looking for 4 points. And between 7 and 8, we're looking for 4 points. Then finally, this is our 9th grade. Interestingly enough, the jump between 8th and 9th grade that we're looking for is 1.5. And that's in math, and we're looking for 1 point in reading. And I think it speaks to something many of us maybe knew anecdotally, but didn't really realize that growth between 8th grade and 9th grade is not as I guess what I'm trying to say is the transition to high school is just like getting into kindergarten, right? It's a huge transition for our students. And so much of it is social and emotional. And then the academic part comes second. We really work hard to try to solidify that transition. And in terms of our measures, we're looking for smaller gains academically. Okay, so in math, we're looking for 5-point jump from 7th to 8th, and 8th to 9th at 1.5. And then in reading, we are looking for 4 points between 7th and 8th, and then the 1 point. You can see that's where we have a little bit of a flat line there. Now, one more thing I would like to add is that in terms of participation rates, I know that Jill Cohen is going to have numbers for you at the high school board meeting. And we can't get district participation rates until the district crunches those numbers over the summer. So you have to get those from your building principals, and I can help facilitate that information. But generally speaking, our opt-out culture starts to really pick up a bit in 9th grade, because 9th graders aren't necessarily seeing the direct value on their own performance and needs as a student. And participation rates were required by the state to have, at least 95% participation rate. We've struggled to meet that consistently. And the reason why I have that is they want to make sure that our underserved students their data is counting and that we're not forgetting about them. And different in our district is that we actually have a lot of high performing students opt out. And so that's sort of part of the privilege of knowing you have that option. And many of our high performing students take advantage of that. So I think that's also indicative in our 9th grade data.
One other piece of data that we have taken on this year is looking at your Schoolnet, early bird reading assessment. It's being piloted in our district this year, and our kindergartners and our first graders took it this fall. It's a study, a research study done at Boston Children's Hospital by the Florida Center for Reading Research. It's comprised of 11 subtests, and then those 11 subtests get put together into a percentile. So the percentile is what I'm going to be sharing with you. The main DOE is paying for the pilot this year. In the AOS budget, there is money next year. It's $7.50 per child for the year to do this test, and it gets done 3 times a year, fall, winter, and spring. It's the early bird people. The test was for kindergartners, and it's normed for kindergartners, but we chose to test our kindergartners and our first grade because of COVID. We wanted to see how our first graders. We just wanted to see how our first graders were doing. We had no other real measure to do that. Next year, we'll be able to have our pre-K join that group. And then the following year, 2nd grade, they'll have it nationally normed for 2nd grade as well. So our students, the cutoff is the 70th percentile. And what that tells us is that anybody in kindergarten who scored below the 70th percentile really needs some tier 1 interventions within the classroom. And our teachers are amazing at being able to provide those interventions. And that speaks to the fact that our first graders, 79% of our kindergartners were below the 70th percentile, but our first graders only 17%. So those first graders need a great deal of growth despite COVID and despite all the other things on in their lives. So in conclusion, we really need to focus on those early interventions. We know that if we could provide better RTI support for students, if we had more universal pre-K for students, that students would be going up through the grades better prepared for learning. Early intervention is so important. Julie and I just done a webinar and learned that by the time a student is in 4th grade, it takes 4 times as long to intervene as it does if that child were in kindergarten. So our resources and for the children's sake, it's better to intervene as soon as we possibly can. And that's one of the reasons why we're implementing the early bird testing. We're also looking at providing some teacher leadership opportunities, supporting students with disabilities, and we really want to ensure equity for all students. Thank you very much.
Are there any board member questions or you so far?
Just questions.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks for the presentation. Can you talk more about advancing teacher leadership? What might that look like?
Well, we're still in very early forms of brainstorming. We're trying to do a systemic approach. We don't want to just make stuff up and say, you're doing this for a little bit of time and that's it, but to have something ongoing and built in with rotations of teacher leadership. We're trying to build it in with training. So teacher leaders actually have training facilitation. And then we're also looking at, and one of the things we haven't quite, this is overstepping a little bit because we're not fully there yet. We know three things have been really critical in terms of teacher leadership advancing nationally. People who have responded best during COVID had strong teacher leadership. So they were able to pivot and meet students' needs more quickly and rapidly. So we don't see anything changing anytime soon in terms of our situations here, and we need to be able to respond rapidly to students' needs. So we know teacher leadership is a key instrument to that piece. We also know that in terms of equity work, lifting that load is enormous and we need to spread it around. So again, teacher leadership is a key strategy in that piece. Rattling these off very quickly. Wait a minute, but equity, COVID. I mean, really just best practices, best learning practices and staying on top of your game. So I know I had a better, more eloquent way to say that, but I think you get the point. So we're looking at a systemic way to put that in place in a way. We've got creative grant funding lines from the state and things of that sort. We're trying to think a little outside the box on how we can support that with training and rotation, quite frankly, so that we don't have the same people always. We don't want Supreme Court appointments for grade level or content level teams or specific projects. We're looking for rotations that make sense. So that's what we're doing.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions, so we will move on to updates from subcommittees. The first one is the superintendent search committee, so someone asked about that later. So there will be some update in that. This is about the long-term permanent superintendent position. I'll be brief and say the interim process is much more streamlined because by law we have a matter of weeks to get a person in place for the 6-month position. So feel free if you're a person who wants to reach out to learn more about that to do that, but that will transpire within the next couple of weeks. But it's important to know that the interim process is entirely separate from the full search process, and there's not a relationship between those two positions. It's not like, oh, the interim person is going to segue into being they're entirely distinct processes. Obviously, whoever the interim does end up being could enter the full search, but they're not advantaged in any way in that search. So and Susan and Brian and others who are here who are and Patrick who are part of that committee, please jump in where I may fail to remember things. We are shortly to be at the point of posting that the ads and so forth for that position, and then going into the winter will be in the application screening and interviewing process. And I think Susan may have the little rubric of who's on there. Maybe she has it handy. If not,
I don't have it handy, sorry. I think it was like 30, I think we used about 36 people.
right, about 36 people, 10 teachers or 10 staff members, some board members, some parents. I should let me see if I can get it.
Something like 5 administrators, which we expanded.
Yeah.
To be able to have someone from every building.
6 board members, 10 teachers. parents and community members.
I can't hear that well, and is this being recorded for the public, so could they hear that?
Yes, do you wanna, talk in the microphone, Susan? Sorry. That's put you on the spot.
Have my rubric, so I'm kind of just guessing at numbers.
I can pull it up on my computer, but, while Susan's coming up to the microphone, I could, say that we, that every person who participates has to go through this, diversity and, equity and hire, a couple of legal trainings, and those dates are January, one of them just moved, but January 19th and February 3rd. So, and there'll be Zoom evening trainings, but that's important to know that you must, by our bylaws and by some legal requirements, participate in those to be involved in the, anything from the screening to the interviewing process. If you're
Okay, so I think I know we had 10 teachers, and that included support staff. So we had put forth to the building administrators to gather that information and to let teachers and support staff know if they were interested to give their names to them. I think a lot are going to Selena by default. Same with the parents. The building administrators were asked to put word out to any parents and community members that might be interested in being part of the process. And I'm sorry, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head. There are 6 board members on the search committee that will be involved. And originally we had 5 administrators, but realizing we need equity across the district. It's that balance of trying to have as many people with much breadth across the district and not having an unwieldy large group of people to try and wrangle for dates and times. So.
Yes, and I would encourage anyone who has, opinions or thoughts, or you just have, questions, to please call or email me. And I will be happy to, try to shed any light that I can, if there's unresolved. I mean, obviously, board members will communicate, but also if you're a community member or staff member or whatever in the audience here, and a question comes to your mind, please feel free to reach out, because the goal is a transparent and accountable process where we find absolutely the right superintendent for our AOS. I think we won't hire someone unless we feel convinced by all the stakeholders at the table that this is absolutely the right person for our AOS. We would look at other, longer term interim options separate from our current interim if we do not find that the right person. I mean, I'm very optimistic and hopeful that we're going to find the right match, but we're not going to rush into any person who's not right for our AOS. Gail, did you have your hand up?
I didn't, but you anticipated it.
Sorry.
Very successfully. Is the board itself going to see the job description or the advertisement or the metrics that you're using, that you're putting out to potential applicants before it goes out?
Yes, we're meeting tomorrow, right? Yes. And to talk about things like the ads, and I would anticipate that we would send that, those out. I don't know what you mean by metrics.
Well, I mean, you are developing a description of what we're looking for, right? In qualifications for the successful candidate. It would be nice if the whole board could see that.
Yes. So going back to June or whenever we, we got in our process where the ad hoc committee was selected. I mean, there's been a lot of board turnover and so forth since then. I think what, in my mind, but I'm one person, wouldn't work is to have 28 people, tinkering on the ad, right? So I think I think it's entirely appropriate that we would send it out to the board to see. And, you know, if someone was like, oh my God, they could, you know, that's, can't happen, that's, you know, that's really, you know, something egregious. But probably, what wouldn't work is to have the whole board sort of wordsmithing the ad. Does that make sense?
Well, I understand what you're driving at.
I mean, I think the ad hoc committee could take feedback and incorporate that, but probably that would be, but ultimately there would come a point where the committee would have to decide, right? Does that make sense?
Yes, to a point. I mean, the committee is serving at the pleasure of the whole board. And I
Right.
think the committee has been asked by the board, as if I understand, I wasn't on the board then, to do this task, and I certainly respect that. It would just be nice to have some back and forth with the whole board as this process goes along, to make sure that the whole board thinks that we're heading in the right direction. That's all. I mean, key points in the process. to
Yes.
get some-
Certainly, I think we can send out the ads and the letter. I think you're talking about the letter to the applicants. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah.
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 Susan?
I'll shout, I promise. It's worth mentioning that all the components of the application, the letter, the details, the descriptors and the questions we've asked, were all drawn from both the survey and the listening sessions. So they're based in data that we've acquired as best we can from the district.
Are there, Jamie?
I'm just wondering, is there a timeline, like working backwards from June when the new superintendent would start to today? Is the committee working off a timeline? And are we on that timeline? It seems to me if the job description isn't out and we're getting applications in January, I'm just working backwards from it. There might be a person sitting at home that's unemployed, that's not in a school, that's the perfect candidate, but if that's not the case, they're currently a superintendent, is it realistic at this point? You know what I'm saying? Like, are we on timeline, I guess?
I believe we're pretty close to the timeline that was laid out, you know, with the idea that we're going to be interviewing people in the mid to late winter. Is that, yeah, right, does that match other people on the committee's recollection? I'm happy to share the timeline. I don't have it in front of me right now, but I'm happy to email it to you. It's on my computer. Yeah. Again, and board members also, like if you have, Gail always chimes in, but other board members, if you have, you know, thoughts or feedback about or concerns about the process, you are always invited to contact me or other members of the, you know, committee with that feedback. Are there more questions? We have the interim thing was just to circle back to that briefly. It was posted and that has now closed, you know, because of the aggressive nature of our, the necessarily aggressive nature of our timeline. Are there other questions? Okay, moving on to middle school planning committee is on a little hiatus, partly while we figure out its relationship to reorganization. Susan, do you have an update from reorganization? There's no update. So that is also waiting for things to settle out a little bit. The anti-racism task force, we've had two very successful meetings. I think Erin is here. Erin, do you want to offer any report other than say that, yeah, say what you go for it. Or I can if you don't want to, but I missed the first meeting.
No, we went very well. Yeah, very encouraged by the group. It seems like we're gonna, it's gonna go really well. So it's a big group of people.
One thing that did emerge in the anti-racism task force is sort of a need for just some sort of clarity in communicating what between, you know, I think people were anxious to hear about from the board presentation last spring, like what's the board been doing? And turns out, a lot of the stuff is already in play, and among people on the task force, there's some, lack of clarity about what things of those recommendations, many of them aren't things that the board would implement. They are things that occur at like the building or educational, there are things just that we wouldn't be implementing. They occur at some other level of this operation, but they are happening. It's just that, there has to be a conduit to let the task force know that. So, when I'm hopeful that we can work with Julia or whoever and to shed some light on the many things from that report that are already happening, the things that aren't, and how they might happen, some stumbling blocks of things that maybe can't happen, and also kind of bringing clarity to what exactly is the board's role in all of this, and making sure we're being held accountable. We as the board by the task force, but also that we all kind of have a shared understanding about what that actually means. Does that sound correct, everyone?
That does sound correct.
Okay, that brings us to our first discussion item, which is the fiscal year 23 budget, and it was sent, a draft was sent around, I believe, to board members, so hopefully we've had that, and I don't know, Nancy is here to assist as needed, the magician who created this, and Mark, so I don't know how we want to pull my budget up. Mark, do you want to lead this discussion, or do you want to do this?
Typically, as we do with our other budgets, we start off with a projection on carry forward and revenue. So Nancy, you want to give that overview, what the differentials might be. And again, these are unaudited figures.
You can see on the first page, there isn't much for revenues actually for the AOS. There's the assessment is what is put into the school, all of the school budgets to according to their percentages to pay for the AOS operations. We do have reimbursement, the OT part of the budget. That is done on a usage basis, so that's billed out twice a year. And then funding for the second psychologist position is done through grants and donations. At this point, we're able to extend that out for next year with grant funding, so that does not impact the AOS budget as a total for next year. Our carryover, when we did this process last year, we anticipated that we'd have around $92,000 that we'd be starting this current year with. And we've had an unaudited figure of around $164,000. And then based on current anticipated revenues and expenditures throughout the budget, the difference between that, it brings it down to about 27,000. So that's a loss of about $64,000 for the revenue. So basically, we can go through the budget, but the totals, as you see on the bottom, it's the anticipated assessment increase with the 25 grand for additional items would be about 245,000, and the total budget increase would be about $187,000. You want to address?
Sure. Yeah. So again, just major points. You'll see placeholders for salary and benefits here. We've budgeted in all of our cost centers for a projection health insurance increase of 10%. I know last year, both Nancy and I were nervous about requests to go 8%. We did that. I think we were still nervous when we did it. It came in okay. Neither Nancy and I would recommend budgeting 8% for an increase. 10% is your placeholder. It's where we would recommend you go in all of your budgets. And again, if those funds or those projections come in less than that 10%, that would go towards carry forward. It can't be spent in any other area. Additionally, as everybody well knows, we don't know where contractual agreements will end up. And so we've had to do a placeholder there. I'm not going to get into the specifics in this venue of what that placeholder is or is not for the board. I know there's an executive session later in the evening. It's not appropriate to be discussing that publicly. So the board can have that discussion later, but there is a placeholder for negotiated agreements in the AOS budget, as there is in all other budgets that the boards will see. Outside of that, you'll see very little in the way of increases in this budget. There were some questions about the Office of Teaching and Learning. For folks who may not have been on the board or may not know, last year we had a position with Julie Meltzer as the Director of Teaching and Learning for the district, and we had a data RTI coordinator. You will see in this budget there's an offset, essentially through a restructuring that the board supported. The RTI position was eliminated. The work didn't go away. It was restructured into two positions. So you have two directors, a pre-K through 6 Director of Teaching and Learning and a 7 through 12 Director of Teaching and Learning. So the offset there was those two salaries are incorporated there, but the RTI position was backed out. So you can see how that math plays out. And again, there are some differences depending upon what plans or benefits people would in those positions would have, family plans and so on and so forth. With regard to the Office of Superintendent, again, with your superintendent search, you have a placeholder there. And again, depending upon where you lie up, where you end up with that individual, the placeholder that we would recommend, whether it be the superintendent or any other position, is a full family plan. So you can budget accordingly, depending upon what that individual's needs may or may not be. The big piece to this budget is reflecting the increase is an additional item for special education support. I did share a document with the board that was put together by Melissa Beckwith. It includes, and there was an update earlier today, it includes special education numbers across the district. That does not include 504s. Those are just purely students with identified IEPs, individual education plans. The rationale for that, if you look at the numbers in the budget, we have historically over the last several years budgeted at least $15,000 to support or for additional supports in that office. You will see the offset where that was eliminated. 15,000 is being recommended for elimination, but a part-time position, part-time without benefits for support. So it's a net increase under additional item. The request is for 25,000. So it's a net increase of $10,000. Nancy, did I miss any other? That is the only additional item in the budget. Jessica, I don't know if you had any other pieces you wanted to be mentioned or you wanted to go over.
No, I think that certainly will take questions. John?
The additional nursing position, is that still under whatever funding we had originally? Or is that wrapped into this budget, not as additional?
Go ahead.
So you may remember that we budgeted for, I'll give you the whole overview. Last year, we budgeted for asymptomatic testing monies in our budget, $80,000. Actually, was a small portion of the AOS budget, but each of the school cost centers had it. We obviously did not expend the money on asymptomatic testing. We're doing the pool testing. I came to the board a couple of months ago with a request to access that money for support for nurses. We are actively still seeking an individual that can provide that support. We've had a couple of candidates that we've vetted that just didn't pan out. And we're still looking, but in short, John, what you're seeing is that Well, as early as tonight, the Bar Harbor budget was reviewed and there was monies requested in that budget for nursing support. I think what you'll see is building principals coming forward based upon what their needs may be. So the short answer to your question is you're not seeing any requests in the AOS budget because that's being reflected in local budgets.
Jamie?
Just a comment about the budget in general, and then just a concern or a comment about the new position that's being suggested in this, and maybe we could separate those two. First on the budget, so the increase projected for this year is 8.35%. If you take the 2021 numbers just 2 years ago with 1.985 million, and then this year's for 22-23 projected budget is 2.4 and change. That's an almost 25% increase just in 2 years. So Mark, I get what you're saying about that. That's not COLA, right? So that's a not insignificant
I will,
raise over 2 years.
there might be more to say about this, but I just want to jump in and say that a big piece of this is the negotiated agreements line, because that money will, if I'm saying this wrong, financially, that money will flow back out to the buildings, but that's how we're talking about, that's how we're budgeting for like salaries and other things that will be increasing when we, does that make sense? Like,
Where's that line?
In the office of the superintendent, negotiating agreements.
and I can get more into that in the executive session, but that's a big, in my,
It's the,
yeah,
that's the primary factor.
it's the primary factor in that.
So it's 58,000 per this budget. It's 58,000 of the $463,000 increase over 2 years today. So unless I'm missing something. It's only 10% of the total.
There are several different items that we added the operations person this year. That was an increase in this year's budget.
Right.
And also there's that second psychologist position, which will show on both sides. It kind of artificially inflates the budget, but it is on the revenue side too. So the actual assessment went down. Wasn't as high, I should say, as, so that there are a couple of items that kind of artificially inflated. Plus, we did increase by the operations position this year. That we're
And also the
in.
divide, taking one position and making it two.
Right, that, there was a small increase between all of those in that particular cost center. And then
Is that grant in perpetuity
the,
that funds the social? work position?
no,
Got
that's
it. So
what I was
That's a
explaining.
budget obligation that if the revenue's not there, we'll have to continue to take on.
The second psychologist position, that was what I was explaining, that we were getting money for donation, between the donations and the grant funds. So we were able to extend that out to next year, but it shows on both sides of the budget. So you see it in the budget, but you also it's on the revenue side. But that after that, that would be something that you would have to vote on to put it in your budget after that, after next year.
And I guess just on this position itself, again, I would rather, like we have with other positions, discuss this and vote on it if appropriate, separate from the budget. Is that the way the job description is written, there's something specific in here. So as an example, the chapter, the complete and submit annually chapter 33 and end of year reports per the state legislature. That must be done by the superintendent. And the EFS part 05 part 1 and the complete and submit annually EFS 04 state agency kind of reports per state legislature. That has to be done by the director. So I think there's certain things in here that we may want to look at, and it might be best for the next superintendent to decide, as we've already added over the last year, multiple positions administratively, and we've increased the budget 25% in 2 years. It might be best to table this and have the next superintendent decide, as we look at overall budget, how we want to staff the administration.
So you're suggesting maybe that we table the not the budget, but the.
This
position.
specific position.
Yes, okay.
Melissa, you may want to speak to Mr. Whitehead's comments because this has been a 5-year request. So maybe this is an appropriate time to let him know that what your office is dealing with right now.
So many of these reports, so a lot of the data gets tracked and.
Melissa, you should come down,
Oh,
please.
sorry. So a lot of, most of these reports are done 9 times. All of these reports are done 9 times because we're separate. A lot of this data comes in and needs to be tracked regularly. That's when the admin assistant is doing. And then that data comes to me. I verify things, sort it, get it into the report, and then verify my pieces that then have to go sometimes to Nancy, and then always to Mark, and then they do their layers of it as well. The baseline or the beginning phases is what the administrative assistant regularly, monthly is keeping us on, or weekly. Also coordinating with our data coordinator in the office, not in our office, but in the central office. So that there's a lot of collaboration that goes on between the two of them. That,
No, I completely understand all that. I'm just saying, again, we've been adding a lot of positions. The budget's increased 25% over 2 years. It might be best to let the next superintendent decide how his or her administration and staff.
I'll defer to you, Jessica, but this request did not come from me. This was a request from my special services director, but you layer it any way you want. I mean,
I mean, that's certainly an option that we could do that. Are there other thoughts? I mean, we're discussing, we're not acting tonight, so we don't, I'm not dismissing your thing. You can certainly, I mean, we'll have to circle back, we can certainly make that decision. You know,
Just as long as we're clear that according to Mark, we're talking about a $10,000 increase. It's not an entirely, there's already somebody doing a bunch of this for 15,000. And this is an unbenefited position, is that what you're saying?
That's what's being recommended.
Right, so a part-time, is that like half-time or something?
Correct.
so we, you know, when we get to the action portion of this, we can certainly contemplate that approach. Jamie, are there other questions about the budget? Great.
I just have little tiny things. What happened with office supplies this year? Why were they 15,000? It seems like they're really over. Just wondering, and I know we don't have, you know, you're not translating that forward, but just thinking of printing, things like that. I'm just wondering about that. The only other sort of, I don't know if it's called creep, but I just noticed, and I know it's such a small amount of money, but I always see like the special projects line just always, it's only a little bit, but in all the different cost centers for the different offices, superintendent, the coordinator, those seem to have gone up incrementally. I was looking at a couple of years ago. I'm not saying they shouldn't, but I know that sometimes what's expended is maybe around $1,000 or so, but they seem to be incrementally increased. I know they're probably low from 2020 because a lot of the special projects that I recall from Julie Meltzer's office were sort of like larger educational initiatives that were canceled, like CERT was canceled, like the loon person was canceled, the some like here with the Solon Spinal Wildlife. But in general, I'm just wondering a little bit about that creep in that line item. And that was sort of it.
So in the office of the superintendent special projects, that those monies are flat, 2,500. And essentially what that money is utilized for is to provide support if the board does workshops or other pieces like that. The superintendent's office essentially doesn't really have a budget. The lion's share of the budgeting costs that go out excuse me, let me back up. The superintendent's budget is a small subset of the larger budget of the district. Those funds that are primarily expended on student services, the lion's share come from the school-based budgets. But the $2,500, at least in that line item, is not increased, and that's to support various projects that frankly, may be throughout the central office and or the board. It's not to support the superintendent. I can't really speak to the teaching and learning office. I don't know with your special project money, Rhonda or Julie, you guys have only been in the chair for a few months, so it may not be fair to have you come. But is there anything you want to add to that? It hasn't? Okay, so-
Yeah, no, I know, but I remember when there was like much less. I remember, and then we added, I remember that you had no, there was no budget, and then we needed to buy office chairs, so we put $4,000 into special budgets, special projects. So I'm just saying in general, I've seen it, and I look back at it, I see a little bit of a creep there. I'm just asking for explanation about the creep.
The chairs we budgeted separately as an additional item.
Yeah.
But again, I could go back, Marie, I think it's been
That's not
2,500 for.
My only
That's
other
couple
question
years.
is about kind of the creep too, with like duties, fees and conferences and travel and things like that. I know that I just know where I work, that's really been curtailed. We find so many other ways to, unfortunately, those great, a lot of those in-person learning opportunities, we can't happen anymore. And one positive is that you actually can go to more of them because you don't have to go someplace to spend all that money. So again, I'm just wondering a little bit about the creep in that line item over the years. I know on paper and last year, but in terms of what's expended and what's continuously being budgeted for those, I realize they're relatively small. I just would want, just thinking about that creep and being conscious and aware of it and what it's, whether or not it can be a little bit tighter. So you don't respond to it, but I'm just saying that can be tighter at some point.
There are other questions, and if questions arise between now and our next meeting, obviously, please reach out to me and I'll communicate with the superintendent and with Nancy to try to figure that out. In between before we have our next meeting. So.
I just want to second what Marie said, because I looked at the travel items, the lines throughout and I couldn't understand why some of them were 6,000 and some of them were 4,800 and some of them had significant increases. And I don't know how or when people get reimbursed for travel, it all may be completely understandable, but I couldn't follow it through all the different costs.
Nancy, is that something you can answer or come back to us?
Right, in some of the areas there's more staff travel itself, like, going from school to school or whatever. But then for the most part, just recently, there hasn't been much for like conference travel would be in there too, but there hasn't been much recently on that. So it's, and it also under the travel, the dues and fees and conference line takes care of any registrations for conferences, but any other costs, like if there was lodging or travel or food or anything like that, we reimburse where that goes under staff travel.
Right.
So that's more than just, a regular travel thing. And also, I hope everybody, I hadn't updated the assessment sheet, and the second one that came out, that revised one that came out today, does have the updated assessment sheet on it. And I just hadn't had a chance to get the formula updated and everything with, because it's based on an average of your budgets, your staff size, and your enrollments. So those were completed today, and that went out this afternoon. So it will match the budget now. So if there's any questions on that, I can answer them.
There are other questions. Okay. That brings us to action items, which is primarily, well, first one is election of the vice chair. Since Ingrid stepped down, I suddenly realized we had no vice chair. And so we need to do some, get someone. Are there any nominations?
I'd like to nominate Brian Hankel as vice chair.
Is there a second? Any discussion? Any other nominations? Don't all fight for this position. Okay, any discussion? All in favor? All opposed? Okay. Congratulations, Ryan. You are now the AOS vice chair. Okay, so that, and I'll talk to you about that. So that brings us to second reading and adoption of policies. I think this is just a continuation of our process from last time. I think it should be pretty straightforward. Rhonda, do you want to, light to shed on this?
No, you just said it. It's a continuation. We didn't bring any, knowing the meeting might be longer, we didn't bring any policies forward this time for first meetings. We'll do that in January.
So I don't know, maybe there's a couple of new people here, but we were revising our tobacco policy to match, current needs and current law. And so hopefully you clicked on it and read it, but certainly I would take a motion to adopt this replacement policy. Gail? Okay.
Do you want to do them all or one at a time?
Unless there's an opposition, I would take them as a slate because we already discussed them last time. Unless there's some burning discussion that's arisen since then. Is that the will of the group? Is that okay if we take them as a slate? Okay.
That would be my motion to move the slate of proposed policy changes.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is that John Bennett? Yeah. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor? Okay, is there any other business? Okay, future agenda items, for sure, we will return to the budget. And we will return to our reports and updates, and we will also be addressing the issue of voting on an interim superintendent, I hope, soon. What other future agenda items are there?
I don't know if it's an agenda item, but I wanted to pick up on something that we heard in public comment about restoring the second public comment
Yes.
session. You may recall, because I think you've been on the board, that we used to have a second public comment session in all of our board agendas.
Mhm.
We recently updated the policy. I can't quite recall whether or not it says we can't have one. I believe it's up
This is the discretion of the board.
the discretion of the board chair. So I would advocate for the similar reasons that were raised in public comment, that that's something we should consider. at the
Speaking for
AOS.
myself as the discretion of the board chair, I'd be happy to have a second public comment session, but I will put it on the agenda so the board can weigh in and also what the policy can do. Considering. I'm sure Jamie?
I think Gail had mentioned to me that this was brought up not as an agenda item, but just in passing at the last meeting, but I think either as an agenda item or a discussion item to discuss what's the schedule for administrative evaluations for the spring. Just getting those back on track, because I think it could happen in 2 or 3 years.
We will put evaluation on. There, okay. And then I'll just note, because we just elected Brian as the vice chair. In the past, I think there has been a circle, a town way that is circled by towns, and that has become kind of convoluted recently for lots of reasons. But I was going to go back and look, and it is my hope that we would you know, within the next year or so, try to return back to that, that town rotation, just to make sure that with leadership that we're all equitable. So that's not an agenda item, but we can sort, but I'm just putting it out there. Okay, unless there are other agenda, future agenda items, the next meeting is Wednesday, December 15th, 2021 at 6 p.m., the annual meeting. And so, Lily,
I just want to acknowledge and thank you. But thank you all for coming.
Lily. So I would now take a motion to go into executive session pursuant to 1 MRSA 4056E contract negotiations. Is that Brian? Your second? Okay, no,
You want to go into both at once or you want to do it
we have to go in and out. Okay, all in favor?